Is this Helen Miller?
The man's voice on the phone sliced through the quiet air of my deli. It was early morning, the shop filled with the smell of coffee and baking bagels. And I was just standing there, holding a lukewarm mug in my hand. Then he said,
Do you remember the case of the triplets abandoned at the Queens landfill in 1975?
My heart dropped, and that phrase, "I've hated my whole life, the landfill baby," rang in my ears all over again. I had endured, I had fallen apart. And strangely, this time I felt a bit of hope mixed in with the fear. How that one phone call turned my entire life upside down. Let me tell you the story from here. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. The metal shutter rattled upward, cutting through the early morning air. I am Helen Miller, a 68-year-old woman who runs a small deli near Flushing, Queens. Every morning at 6 o'clock without fail, I raise that shutter, bake bagels, and brew coffee. That was how my day began. Today, like always, I placed my worn coffee mug on the counter and turned on the small radio. Jazz music filled the space. My eyes landed on the 70s rock band poster hanging on the wall. This place was a space I had protected for nearly 40 years. It might not be fancy, but it was the only place that carried my name. The morning customers started trickling in one by one. I handed the regular elderly gentleman his usual black coffee and wrapped a sandwich for a commuter rushing to work, greeting them with a smile. That was my routine. If anyone asked, I could say I had a decent enough life. After lunch, in the afternoon, I briefly closed the shop and headed to the nearby Social Security office. I was going to get a consultation about my retirement benefits. Truth be told, I was a bit late getting around to it. But I figured since I had always been alone anyway, taking my time was fine. The office clerk looked at the computer monitor and said my birth record was very brief. There was no hospital name, and the parent fields were blank. The moment I heard those words, my chest went cold. I had expected it, but hearing it directly was different. So in the end, I am someone who does not exist in the records. Never written down as someone's daughter, someone's family. That thought circled through my mind. On my way home from work, I took a detour on purpose. I passed through the alley near the garbage dump. Back in the 70s, this was where I had been found. Near the trash heap in outer Queens. Now it had been turned into a parking lot, but I would sometimes pass by it. I am not sure why I did that. I guess I was just curious about where I began. The words the orphanage director said when I was young echoed in my ears. You were a baby abandoned at the garbage dump, Helen. Every time I heard those words, I would pretend it did not bother me. That way, the other kids would not tease me as much. But at night, I would cry alone under my blanket. Why was I next to a trash heap? Why did no one want me? Around 10 at night, while I was cleaning in the back room of the deli, the telephone rang. The old bell sounded unusually loud. I hesitated for a moment about whether to answer or not. But my hand reached for the receiver first. Is this Helen Miller? It was an unfamiliar male voice. He said he was Michael Grant, an attorney from Grant & Partners law firm in Manhattan. When he mentioned he was calling about an inheritance matter, I almost laughed. What kind of inheritance could someone like me possibly have? You must have the wrong number. I was about to hang up when the lawyer asked me a question. Do you know anything about the record of triplets abandoned at a Queens garbage dump in 1975? In that moment, my hand stopped. My heart started beating faster. Triplets, abandoned, garbage dump. Those words echoed in my head. The lawyer said in a calm voice that I might be one of those triplets. He wanted to meet and explain in detail, and asked if I could make time. I could not answer. I just stood there gripping the receiver, breathing shakily. I had thought I was alone my whole life. But now he was saying there were two more babies abandoned on the same day, in the same place as me. After hanging up, I stood there for a long time. The music from the radio sounded distant. That night, I could not sleep. The next morning, I looked out the window to see snow piled up everywhere. The sound of sweeping snow off the sidewalk in front of the deli with a broom filled the morning air. Scrape, scrape. As I listened to that sound, I thought about last night's phone call. I wondered if it had been a dream. But my cell phone call log clearly showed a Manhattan number. Around lunchtime, Harry came into the deli. Harry works as a hospital security guard. He grew up in the same orphanage as me. We do not call each other brother and sister, but we have lived like family. We even chose to use the same last name. Harry sat at the counter, bit into a ham and cheese sandwich, and grumbled. Inheritance? Helen, that is the kind of thing that only happens in movies. It does not happen to people like us. I thought so too, but strangely, the lawyer's voice kept circling in my ears. Still, Harry, he is the first person who has ever wanted to hear my story. When I said that, Harry sighed and chewed his sandwich. In the evening, Harry and I were watching the television news in my living room. A caption appeared at the bottom of the screen. Wall Street legend Donald H. Young passes away. The scene of a glamorous Manhattan funeral home played out, and a photo of an elderly man's face appeared large on screen. The news anchor said that Young, known as a self-made billionaire, had died refusing to make his will public, and his family was proceeding with a private inheritance process. I stared blankly at the screen. Donald H. Young. I did not know why that name bothered me so much. It should have had nothing to do with my life. But I felt a heaviness in my chest. Harry asked me what the lawyer had said. I answered slowly. He said triplets. That there were 3 of us. Abandoned on the same day, in the same place. Harry's face hardened. He did not say anything for a long time. He just stared at the television screen. I was the same. We had lived our whole lives as just the 2 of us. And now there was another one somewhere. As night deepened, I put on my coat and went outside alone. I stood in front of the old Catholic orphanage, now converted into a daycare center. The old chain link fence and the playground remained. When I closed my eyes, I heard voices from childhood. The director's words, "You 2 were abandoned together. They say you are twins." When I heard that, I had looked at Harry. We looked nothing alike and our birthdays were a few days apart. But we were children who had been abandoned together. Back home, I opened the cabinet shelf above the kitchen sink. I took out a dusty old envelope. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper. 1975, month and day, found at trash heap in outer Queens. The handwriting in pen was faint. Harry looked at that paper over my shoulder. He let out a long sigh and said maybe I should just go. At least we should know what happened to us. We have always wondered. I nodded. Yes, I need to know. I want to know who I am, why I was abandoned, and where the other one is. That night, I took out my cell phone and checked the lawyer's number again. I decided to call in the morning. I did not want to run away anymore. Monday morning, I took out my old beige coat and put it on. Usually I just wore my apron at the deli, but today was different. I could not believe I was going to a Manhattan law firm. I took the number 7 train from Queens. The sound of the train running on the tracks rang in my ears. Clatter, clatter. Buildings of New York passed by the window, and I gripped the strap of my bag tightly. Inside the bag was that old piece of paper. I got off at the Midtown station and walked between the tall buildings. The glass-enclosed lobby, people in suits rushing back and forth. I felt even more shabby among them. Old coat, worn shoes, wrinkled hands. Was it okay for someone like me to be here? When I entered the law firm conference room, attorney Michael Grant greeted me. He offered me hot coffee and asked me to sit. This is a long story, so I will be honest with you. That is how he began. Documents were spread out on the table. New York City Child Welfare Services records from 1975. The title read Report on Unnamed Triplets Case. I steadied my breath and looked at the paper. Instead of names, it said Baby A, Baby B, Baby C. In the last name field, Young was temporarily noted. I froze when I saw that character. Young, not Miller, which I had chosen, but the surname that had originally been recorded. Michael explained. This record was copied by a housekeeper who turned it over to us. And there is still one more person alive. He turned the laptop screen to show me. On the screen was a photograph of a woman. Evelyn Ross. Someone with eyes and a jawline similar to mine. I stared at the screen. This person was one of the triplets abandoned on the same day as me. My voice trembled. I want to know the truth. Who I am, why I was abandoned, and how I am connected to this person. Michael nodded. Then let us start with the old orphanage records and the county court archives. Your real name should be there. Your legally registered name. I took out that old paper from my bag and placed it on the table. Michael picked it up and read it slowly. His expression became serious. Is this all you have? What about other records? I shook my head. This is all. This was all I received when I left the orphanage. Michael pulled out another paper from his briefcase. This is the death notice for Chairman Donald H. Young. He passed away a few days ago. And he left something about triplets in his will. I asked in surprise. That man knew about us? Michael answered. Not only did he know, it seems he tried to find you in his later years. But the records were too old and much had been erased. The conference room became quiet. I looked out the window. Sunlight shone between the tall buildings of Manhattan. I could not believe someone had tried to find me. No one had looked for me my whole life, and now to hear this was confusing. Michael said we should start by checking the records. At the New York State Archive Center. There should be old orphanage admission records. We start there. I nodded. Okay, when should we go? Michael opened his calendar and answered. How about tomorrow morning? I will accompany you. On the subway ride back to the deli, I stared blankly out the window. My heart pounded at the thought that tomorrow I might learn my real name. At the same time, I was afraid. What if that name was something I did not want? I called Harry. I told him I was going to the archive center tomorrow. Harry was silent for a moment, then answered. Be careful, Helen. The truth is not always good. I said I know, but I had already made up my mind. The next morning, Michael and I arrived at the New York State Archive Center. As we entered the old building, the smell of dust and paper stung my nose. Only our footsteps echoed in the hallway. We went down to the basement storage room. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, boxes covered in years of dust were stacked on shelves. A staff member pulled out an old binder and placed it on the table. Orphanage admission records from the 1970s, they said. I carefully opened the binder. Yellowed pages filled with pen writing. 1975, month and day. When I found that date, my hands trembled. Triplets found near Outer Queens garbage dump. The names of admitted children were written there. Helen Young, Harry Young, Evelyn Young. The location field read abandoned lot near Queens garbage dump. In one corner was a small note in pencil. Possible father D.H.Y. Michael whispered. D.H.Y. Donald H. Young is the most likely. And the housekeeper who worked in Chairman Young's home is still alive. Would you like to meet her? I hesitated for a moment. What would change if I met that person? But I had come this far and could not turn back. I will meet her. That was my answer. In the afternoon, Harry and I headed to an old apartment complex in the Bronx. The elevator creaked as it went up. It stopped on the 5th floor and the door opened. When we stood in front of the door at the end of the hallway, I took a deep breath before ringing the bell. I heard the sound of a wheelchair rolling inside. The door opened, and a white-haired elderly woman looked at us. Marjorie Clark. The moment she saw my face, she covered her mouth. With trembling hands covering her mouth, tears flowed. One of the triplets. The children I abandoned. We went into the living room and Marjorie opened a drawer. The sound of the drawer opening was unusually loud. What she took out was an old envelope. Inside the envelope was a black and white photograph. 3 babies wrapped in a wet blanket. On the back of the photo was written 1975. Looking at that photo, I felt like I could not breathe. Marjorie said in a trembling voice that Chairman Donald had ordered it to make the babies disappear so no one would know. She and the driver had left those children near the garbage dump. She had been tormented by that guilt her whole life. Harry asked why. Why did you abandon the babies? Marjorie closed her eyes. The chairman was afraid of his wife and the company. If the press found out, everything would end, he said. So he tried to get rid of the children. I steadied my voice and asked, did that man ever talk about us? Marjorie nodded. In his final years, he talked about it every day. He wanted to find the children, wanted to apologize. But he did not have the courage. Marjorie revealed one more thing. Before he died, Donald put a letter and his real will in a bank safe deposit box. Without even his legitimate children knowing. Everything about you should be in there. Michael took notes and asked how we could open that safe. Marjorie answered, you need to prove you are legal heirs. Start with DNA testing. On the way home, I looked out the window. The streetlights looked blurry. Someone abandoned me, and that person regretted it in his final years. What did that mean to me? Harry said I could stop now. If we dig deeper, it will hurt more. But I shook my head. No, I will go all the way. I cannot stop now. That night, I placed the photo. Marjorie gave me on my desk and stared at it for a long time. 3 babies wrapped in a blanket. I could not believe one of them was me. I said to those babies in my mind, I will find your names now. I promise. A few days later, the fluorescent lights of the Manhattan probate court hallway cast a cold glow. Sitting in the plastic chairs waiting for my turn, I felt Harry's hand next to me was cold. I gripped it tightly. Across the hallway, people in suits were murmuring. The legitimate children of Chairman Young and their legal team. A woman named Susan Young looked at me sharply. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a cold and hard impression. The conference room door opened and we went inside. People sat on both sides of the long table. Michael, Harry, and I took seats on one side, while Susan and her attorneys sat opposite us. Susan said in a cold voice, "So that is her? The person claiming to be our father's child?" Her gaze swept over my old coat and worn bag. It was a look mixed with contempt. Harry tried to stand up, but I grabbed his arm. "It is okay," I whispered. I had already prepared myself for this. I had received such looks my whole life. Michael opened his briefcase. The sound of the zipper opening echoed in the quiet conference room. He took out the DNA test results and placed them in the center of the table. Genetic match rate 99.98%. They should be considered biological children of Donald H. Young. Michael's voice was calm but firm. Susan's lawyer jumped up in protest. The possibility of test manipulation cannot be ruled out. We need to verify proper testing procedures were followed. But Michael immediately presented certification. Documents from the New York State Laboratory as well. The air in the conference room grew tense. I could see Susan's face hardening. I looked at the documents on the table and thought, blood relation proven by numbers and graphs. Was this really what I wanted? Then the conference room door opened. Marjorie Clark in her wheelchair entered. The sound of wheels rolling on the floor slowly approached. Marjorie stopped in front of the witness stand. She began to speak in a trembling voice. I personally left those babies next to the garbage dump. It was late at night in 1975. The conference room stirred. Susan shouted, "You expect us to believe this woman's testimony? Is she not lying for money?" But Marjorie was not shaken. "I did not take any money. I just want to confess the sin I have carried my whole life." Tears flowed from Marjorie's eyes. It was Chairman Donald's order. He said to protect his wife and company, the children had to disappear. I asked in a trembling voice, "Did that man ever talk about us? Did he try to find us?" Marjorie nodded. In his last few years, he cried and apologized every day. He wanted to find the children, wanted to see their faces. But he did not have the courage and could not find them directly. Many records had already been erased. Michael pulled out his final card. An envelope retrieved from a personal safe deposit box at a downtown bank. "This is a personal safe will entrusted to me by Donald H. Young. It is a properly notarized document." The moment he opened the envelope, Susan slammed the table. "I cannot accept that. How can a will we knew nothing about be valid?" Her voice trembled. It was a tremor closer to fear than anger. The judge made a quiet gesture. "Let us first check the contents. Attorney, please read it." The conference room became silent. I felt like my heart would burst. Michael unfolded the will. The sound of paper turning was unusually loud. And he began to read. "I, Donald H. Young, write this will while of sound mind." I held my breath. I knew the next sentence would change my life. Michael's voice echoed through the conference room. "I have 3 children I could never tell anyone about during my lifetime. Helen, Harry, and Evelyn Young. My children born in Queens in 1975. Susan jumped up from her chair. "This makes no sense. My father would never say such things." But the judge raised his hand to stop her. "Please continue." Michael read again. "I abandoned them, because I was afraid of the company and reputation, afraid of my wife. Scared of the world's gaze. I was a coward, and that cowardice left 3 lives next to a trash heap." Tears flowed from my eyes. Harry held my hand. His hand was trembling too. The will continued. 40% of my assets will be divided equally among the triplets. This includes partial shares of Young Capital Group, Manhattan real estate, and cash assets. The conference room buzzed. Susan's face went pale. 40%? Do you know how much that is? But the judge remained unmoved. Michael folded the will and took out another envelope. And this is a personal letter addressed to Miss Helen Miller. He handed me the envelope. Written in shaky handwriting on the envelope was to my children. I abandoned in Queens. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. As I took out the letter paper, I smelled old ink. Yellow letter paper with pencil writing. I began to read. I was a coward. I mistakenly believed that my Wall Street reputation and dignity were more important than your lives. From the first sentence, I felt my heart collapsing. When I tried to find you, the records had already been erased. I inquired at Child Welfare Services but was blocked by privacy protection. By then, both I and those who helped me had grown old. As I read the letter, my throat tightened. Harry was clenching his teeth. He muttered quietly that the man was trying to settle everything with money. And a few written words now. The letter continued. I do not ask for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve to be forgiven. But I thought you should at least know whose children you are. And why you were abandoned. The last sentence caught my eye. You were not abandoned, I abandoned you. That responsibility lies entirely with me. Please live your lives. Do not carry my sins. I put down the letter. The conference room was quiet. Susan had her head down. I could see her shoulders shaking. Susan said in a small voice that whenever her father drank, he would talk about it. He would say there were children he had abandoned. That he needed to find them but could not. She raised her head. Her eyes were red. I hated hearing that story. It felt like he was passing his guilt about abandoning you onto us. Susan's voice trembled. But seeing this now, Father really wanted to find you. I answered quietly. Please do not turn that hatred toward us now. We were just babies left at a garbage dump. We did not even have the strength to hate anyone. The judge said the will would be recognized as valid. However, specific inheritance ratios and procedures would require mediation. He asked both legal teams to negotiate. When the meeting ended, I walked out into the hallway. Through the window, the streets of Manhattan were visible. People rushing back and forth, cars passing by, the world still turning. Harry asked what I would do. I took a deep breath. I will not run away. I will get my name back first. And turn the record of our abandonment to our side. Michael approached. The next step is court mediation. Along with negotiating inheritance ratios, if you wish. Biological child registration is also possible. I nodded. I want to reclaim my real name. That night, I read the letter again. The regret of the person who abandoned us could not erase the wounds of those who were abandoned. But at least now I understood why he did it. New York County Court hallway, in the space with plastic chairs. Lined up, Evelyn, Harry, and I sat side by side. Evelyn had flown in from Boston a few days ago. When we first met, we stared at each other for a long time. It was like looking in a mirror. In the hallway where fluorescent light shone white, Evelyn held my hand. Let us get through this together. Her voice was firm. I nodded. The courtroom door opened. As we entered, Susan's lawyer was already seated, organizing documents. We sat at the opposite table. When the trial began, Susan's lawyer stood up. The plaintiffs have lived separate lives their entire existence. They have no emotional ties with the Young family. And have made no contributions to company management. Michael calmly countered. That is because the records were erased. These people are victims, who were intentionally abandoned and deleted from the system. His voice was quiet but powerful. Everyone, I wonder if there is anyone who, like me, has been abandoned yet kept going all the way to this point. Through what happened today, I learned that even our wounds are recorded. And that recorded truth eventually finds its proper place. I realized it late, but it is not too late. And we can still choose the name of our own life. If you have had a similar experience or carry a story in your heart, I would be grateful if you could quietly share it in the comments. If my story has given you even a little comfort or courage, please consider subscribing and liking to walk this road with me. If someone comes to mind, please gently share this video with them today. Thank you so much for listening until the end. And I truly wish that your health and peace stay with you for a long, long time. Michael began stacking documents on the table one by one. Child Welfare Services records, orphanage admission logs, transcript of Marjorie Clark's testimony. DNA test results, the personal safe will. The sound of stacking papers echoed in the courtroom. The judge reviewed the documents. A long silence followed. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. I clenched my hands. My nails dug into my palms, but it did not hurt. The judge spoke. The dispute over the validity of the will requires further review. I recommend mediation for both sides. Please move to the mediation room. The mediation room was a small, stuffy space. Gray walls, one small window, and an old table. We and Susan's side sat facing each other. Negotiations continued for an hour. Susan's side argued to lower the inheritance percentage. Michael insisted on 40% as stated in the will. It was a tense standoff. During the break, Susan called me aside. In a corner of the hallway, she spoke. Whenever my father drank, he would talk about you. That is why I hated it even more. I listened quietly. Susan continued. It felt like he was passing the guilt of abandoning you onto us. I spent my whole life trying to gain father's recognition. But in the end, you were in his heart. I responded to that. Please do not turn that hatred toward us now. We were just babies left at a garbage dump. We were people who did not even know who to resent. Susan turned her head away. After a long while, she said she would accept the mediation proposal. But do not interfere with company management. I nodded. I do not want to anyway. In the end, the triplets were recognized for partial shares of Young Capital Group and cash inheritance. And we decided to use a considerable portion of the inherited money to establish a foundation to help abandoned children. The foundation name was 1975 Triplets Foundation. To never forget the year we were abandoned. A few days later, I filed a name change application with the court, along with biological child registration. As I filled out the forms, I wrote my name with trembling hands. Helen Young Miller. The court clerk reviewed the documents and stamped them. The stamping sound was loud. From now on, your legal surname is Young Miller, the clerk said. I took the new documents. My name written on the paper. Helen Young Miller. The surname Young that had been temporarily assigned when I was abandoned, together with Miller, the surname I had chosen. On the way out of the courthouse, the sunlight was dazzling. Evelyn and Harry were waiting for me. We looked at each other and smiled. Triplets. People who had never been together but were now family. Evelyn asked what I would do now. I looked up at the sky. There is one thing left to do. We need to visit the person who gave birth to us. Michael said he had already found her. In a small town cemetery in upstate New York, buried as an unnamed woman. DNA comparison confirmed she was our biological mother. The following weekend, we headed there. I knew it would be our final visit. The car drove along a winding country road. The sound of tires crunching gravel came through the window. Under overcast skies, a small town in upstate New York appeared. When we arrived at the cemetery entrance, wind blew. Along with the sound of leaves rustling, the scent of pine touched the tip of my nose. The three of us got out of the car and slowly climbed the hill path. The smell of wet earth rose from beneath our feet. Walking among old graves overgrown with weeds, my heart pounded. The person we would soon meet. Someone I had never seen, but who had brought us into this world. About halfway up the hill, Evelyn stopped. Here, where she pointed, stood an old gravestone. A small gravestone half hidden by weeds. I knelt down and pulled away the weeds. The letters carved on the gravestone were revealed. Unknown woman, 1975. Harry said quietly that according to the DNA test results, this was our biological mother. I slowly ran my fingertips over the gravestone. The cold texture of stone transferred to my fingers. Evelyn took white chrysanthemums from her bag. We each placed a chrysanthemum in front of the gravestone. Wind blew and the petals swayed. I sat in front of the gravestone and spoke. The decision to abandon us belonged to someone else. But the person who brought us into this world was surely here. I do not know who you were or why you gave birth to us. My voice trembled, but I continued. But we survived. Abandoned next to a trash heap, we lived to the very end. Harry and Evelyn sat beside me. We held each other's hands. The family I thought existed nowhere in the world was now right beside me. I took Donald Young's letter from my bag. Unfolding the yellowed letter paper, I said, "This was a record of guilt left by the person who abandoned us. Now I would leave it here, beside Mom." I folded the letter and placed it next to the gravestone. I pressed it down with a small stone so the wind would not blow it away. Then I picked up another stone and wrote on it with a marker. To the mother of the 3 babies left in Queens, your children found their names. I placed the stone next to the gravestone, and we sat there for a long time. Without words, just listening to the sound of wind and rustling leaves. How much time passed? The sun began to shine through the clouds. Evelyn stood up and asked if we should go. I nodded and stood up. As we left the cemetery, I looked back. The small gravestone on the hill was growing distant. "Goodbye," I said farewell in my mind. "I hope you know that we are alive." A few days later, a new sign went up in front of the Queen's Deli. Helen Young Miller's Deli. A sign with my real name. A regular customer asked if I had changed the store name. I smiled and handed over the coffee. Yes, because it is my real name now. The records became my ally. That evening, after closing the deli, I sat in the back room looking out the window. The streetlights came on one by one, and I could see people heading home. I took out my new ID. Helen Young Miller. Looking at that name, I thought about it. There is no longer a baby abandoned at a garbage dump. There is only a person who reclaimed her name. My cell phone rang. It was Evelyn. "Helen, we chose the Foundation's first beneficiaries. Triplets at the Queen's Child Protection Center. Just like us." I answered with a smile. "Good. Tell those children our story. That being abandoned is not the end, that records do not abandon us." After hanging up, I looked at the old photograph on the counter. The black and white photo Marjorie had given me. 3 babies wrapped in blankets. Now those babies had all become adults with their own names. As night deepened, I turned off the lights and muttered to myself. We were abandoned, but the records did not abandon us. One line written about a date at the Queen's garbage dump in 1975 rebuilt our lives 50 years later. The sound of lowering the shutter echoed on the street. I walked home and looked up at the sky. Stars began to appear one by one. If there are erased records in your life too, please do not give up. The truth, even if late, always finds its rightful place. That was the lesson I learned. When I arrived home and opened the door, I looked back one last time. The light from the deli sign was shining in the darkness. Helen Young Miller. Not a garbage dump baby, but the story of a person who reclaimed her name.